Well, welcome back to Managerial Accounting. The purpose of this second little mini lecture is to review the take-home part of the exam. Each of the questions was worth 10 points, and a couple of you, for whatever reason, didn't answer the questions. I don't know if you ran out of time or you just didn't know what to do, but that's not a recipe for success. And I made sure I reviewed every single page of what you handed in. So if I made sure I didn't miss anything. So unfortunately, if you didn't answer the question, had no choice but to give you a 0 for the question. Always better, even if you're confused, to make an attempt, and because I do give partial credit. And these questions were all very similar to homework and very similar to ones we had done in class. So the first one that we've got here, they've given us all sorts of information. And on the basis of this information, they want you to come up with a cost of goods manufactured and a cost of goods sold. So cost of goods manufactured would be the beginning inventory of work in process, plus all the materials, the labor, and the overhead. That gives you the total manufacturing costs incurred. You add that to the beginning work in process inventory. That gives you the total manufacturing costs. And here was the first error that quite a few of you made here. The ending work in process is subtracted from the total manufacturing cost to get cost of goods manufactured. So if you add them, obviously you had the wrong number. So there's the first part. There's the cost of goods manufactured. Now, when you do the cost of goods sold, it's finished goods inventory plus cost of goods manufactured gives you goods available minus the ending inventory of finished goods gives you the cost of goods sold. So to get full credit, you had to show your calculations. And again, you need to always show your calculations to let me know that you're actually doing the work and not looking at someone else's work. And also, it's difficult to give you partial credit if you don't show your work because I don't know where you went wrong and you don't know where you went wrong. So get used in the future to showing all your calculations here. So that's the first one. So to get full 10 points here, you had to get the cost of goods manufactured, and then you had to get the cost of goods sold. Second one was very similar to homework, very similar to slides that we did in class, very similar to exercise we did in class. You had to journalize all these different entries. So this narrative here gives you all the information. And then on the basis of this, they wanted you to journalize the following entries. So all the information you need to make the journal entries is up in this paragraph here. So the first one, A, to journalize the entry for the purchase of paper. So it's a debit to raw materials, a credit to accounts payable. And then you've got the transfer of raw materials inventory to work in process, the application of direct labor, and the application of manufacturing overhead. Now, I did it as 3 separate entries here. So here's the raw materials that were used. Here was the wages payable. Here was the factory overhead. You could have combined these all into one entry. So you could have added up all the debits and then shown the credits separately. So whether you did them individually or you did them as 3 separate, the 3 individual entries or one combined entry, that was fine. The most common mistake here, it's not wages expense, it's wages payable. So the credit should have been to wages payable here. C, journalize the entry to show the transfer to the folding department. So you got to take add up all these costs here, and all these costs had to be transferred out of the printing department to the folding department. So if you add those all up, you get 2,325. Debit work in process folding, credit work in process printing. Then you added $450 worth of wages and direct labor. So you debit work in process and you credit wages payable. You also applied overhead as well. So then you had to do the transfer to the finished goods inventory at the actual cost. So the 2,325 plus the 450 plus the 655, that's where you got the 3,430. So that's a debit to finished goods, and that's a credit to work in process. So it started out in work in process printing, then the costs were transferred to the folding department. Some additional costs were incurred, and the next stop after the folding department is the finished goods department, or finished goods inventory. Right, so to get full credit there, you had to get all the journal entries correct. Then for the third one, here what you had to do is you had to determine the cost of goods completed and transferred out and the end of work in process. So you had to here account for all the costs, which included the beginning inventory and process, the beginning balance. So that's work in process, beginning balance. And to that, you had to add whatever was necessary to those costs to get those costs ready. So they told us that there were no additional materials that were added to get that work in process ready, because materials are added at the beginning of the process. But notice here that there was 3,000 equivalent units of conversion costs. So the told you conversion cost was 15 cents and materials costs were 47 cents. So 15 cents worth of conversion for conversions, and you had 3,000 units. So 3,000 times 15 gives you 450. Then to get the units started, the units that were transferred out were 52,000. Okay? The ones that were started and completed here, started and completed during the period 52. And you know that if they're started and completed, that means they're fully complete with regard to material and fully complete with regard to conversion. At least one of you had a really nice schedule, but you used the wrong conversion. You used the wrong direct materials cost. Direct materials were not 57 cents, they were 47 cents. So where you got 57 cents, I don't know. So the 52,000, they get the full charge for material, the full charge for conversion costs. So that gives you the total cost of goods transferred out and completed. Then you had to account for the ending work in process. In the ending work in process, you had 3,500 units for materials, so 35 times 47. And the equivalent units for conversion costs were only 2,100. So 2,100 times 15, that gives you 1,960. So there is your total cost that you account for. It's 38,150, and that's included the amount that was transferred out is 36,190. And the ending work in process is 1,960. And then the fourth one had to do, this is all activity-based costing. So the total budgeted overhead is broken down as follows. So what you do is you got to come up with an overhead rate for cutting. You got to come up with an overhead rate for setting. You got to come up with an overhead rate for setups. You had to come up with one for inspections, and you had to come up with one for purchase orders. So here's where your budgeted amounts are for each of these things. So there's cutting, there's sewing, there's setup, there's inspections, and there's purchase orders. So you can see how I've accounted for them here in terms of getting my rate. And then you have to divide here. It's by total number of labor hours. So you divide cutting 40,000 by 100,000, and labor hours here were 140. So 210 divided by 140. And then setups, you had 80,000 divided by 800. And so that gives me $100 to set up. The inspections are 20,000 for inspections, and there was 1,000 inspections, so 20,000 divided by 1,000. And then you've got the purchase orders. Purchase orders, your total cost was 10,000 divided by 40. So what you do is you come up with rates, overhead rates here for cutting. It's 40 cents an hour. For sewing, it's 150 an hour. Here it's $100 per setup. Here it's $20 per inspection. Here it's 25 per purchasing order. So whether you use this fraction again, like 40 divided by 100,000 is 0.40. 0.40 times 60,000 gives you 24,000. So here what you've got is this is the total amount of overhead that is allocated to the handbags. And they told you that the number of units that were actually made were 60,000 units. Okay, so there's your 60,000 number of handbags. So 170,500 divided by 60,000 gives you $202.84. And then here you use the same ratios here. But here, with regard to the moccasins, we made 40,000 moccasins. So the 40,000 moccasins, you take 189,500 divided by 40,000. Here's your number here: 60,000 handbags, 40,000 moccasins. So 189.5 divided by 40,000 gets you 474. So those of you who screwed this up, where you made a mistake was either you had the number of units wrong, or you used the wrong rate. But here is your total overhead allocated to 60,000 handbags, gives you 284. Total overhead allocated to 40,000 moccasins gives you 474. Okay, so that's it. So just to recap here, so you had to get the cost of goods manufactured, you had to get the cost of goods sold. That was chapter 1 problem. Chapter 2, these were the journal entries that we did for job order costing. Journal entry 3, we didn't actually make you compute the equivalent units. We did a little bit of that in the multiple choice questions. So I actually gave you the equivalent units here. So you had to just make the allocation between that which we transferred out and what the ending work in process was. And then here, this was chapter 4, you had the activity-based costing. So you had to get the overhead rate, and you use that overhead rate based on the various volumes here. So for cutting, it's labor hours. For sewing, it's labor hours. For setups, it's the actual number of setups. For quality inspections, it's the actual number of inspections. And for purchase orders, it's the actual number of purchase orders. So that's how we got 170,500. That's how we got 189,500. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. As far as the next exam, probably very similar format, probably 30 multiple choice and probably at least 4 problems. And I have to say, having graded both, that people, not surprisingly, did better on the take-home part of the exam than they did on the multiple choice. A couple of reasons for that. One, it's a take-home, so there's no time. And I assume, you consulted your book and so forth. So, the fact that it's open book, the fact that it was similar to what we had done in class, the fact that it was similar to the homework, it doesn't surprise me that you did better on the take-home part of the exam. If you struggled with the multiple choice, there's a real technique, and that's why, not to sound like a broken record, I went over the multiple choice questions in class, and I also strongly recommended you do the diagnostic questions as practice with multiple choice. So those of you who didn't do as well in the multiple choice, ask yourself honestly, did you spend the time doing those additional, supplemental analysis questions for each chapter? If you're unhappy with your score and you didn't do that, I would strongly suggest you do that next time. Okay, so with that, I wish you all a great evening. And at the point you're listening to this, you would have gotten your exam back. You know what your score is. So probably should have said at the beginning, have your exam out in front of you as you review these 2 videos. Be well, everybody. Adios. Hasta luego. Au revoir.